Hello, this is New Mexico History in 10 Minutes, and I'm Rob Martinez, State Historian of New Mexico. The United States of America was born in 1776 on July 4th. It was a new, brash country born of new ideas, new technologies, and a people that wanted to expand their horizons and live free. It was a radical idea, revolutionary, and it had impact and reverberations around the world. This new country had ideas that went back for centuries in England. The idea that the king was not above the law. We can thank the Magna Carta for that. Also, a British Bill of Rights. There's a whole genealogy of a balance of power between king on one side and parliament on the other. It's an idea that would affect our nation's government. The idea that there's a president who is not a king, not an emperor, but would be checked and balanced by a Senate and a House, by Congress. So this was a radical new idea, this young nation of 13 colonies that was made up of Native Americans, of people of British background, German background, French background, Dutch background, and of course, Africans as well, who were slaves and free people as well. It was a vital mix from the start. There was never just one language spoken. There were native languages, English, French, German. It's where we get the term Pennsylvania Dutch. It means Pennsylvania Deutsch, German speakers. So out of the gate, this new country was multicultural, multilingual, and ready to take on the world. Well, by 1776, Spain had already been in the southwestern part of the North American continent since the 1590s. So when Thomas Jefferson prophesied that this new nation of the United States would eventually come into contact and conflict with Spain, he had no idea that what would really happen was there would be conflict and connection with Mexico. He didn't know that there would be a new nation of Mexico a few decades later. Nonetheless, this is what would happen. As the United States spread to the west, expanding her borders with manifest destiny, this idea that God chose the USA to rule from sea to shining sea. It was an easy task at first. True, there were already native peoples there for centuries in the Midwest and into the West. Nonetheless, these Americans would just move these people out of the way, sometimes killing them brutally and taking their land. The Louisiana Territories, where New Orleans is and points north, would be purchased quite easily by 1803. The United States thought that they could just buy their way to the West Coast, but Mexico would have none of that. By the mid-1800s, the United States wanted to purchase Texas and New Mexico and California, but Mexico politely declined and said, no gracias, no thank you. Well, there was a revolution in Texas in 1836. She declared her independence from Mexico. Those brash Americans had settled down and taken root in Texas. And so within 10 years, the United States would annex Texas, agitating Mexico. War was on the horizon. Mexico would not sell. So by 1846, the United States under President Polk declared war on Mexico. It was a land grab, and it was a war that was declared under false promises, false legalities, and false information. There was a border dispute. Mexico claimed the Rio Nueces to the north. The United States claimed the Rio Grande to the south. That no man's land was the disputed territory in between. So Polk had his soldiers go into that land. Mexico fired, and Polk said, American blood has been spilt. We must go to war against Mexico. Well, it lasted about 2 years. Polk sent uh, Stephen Kearny and his Army of the West ultimately to secure California, but on the way to take over New Mexico. So this happens in 1846 to 1848. Much like when Vargas returned for Spain in 1692, it looked like a bloodless, peaceful taking of New Mexico. But there were resistance movements at places like Embudo and Mora, and the most famous one at Taos. Interestingly enough, there were people in the United States who were against this war, people whose names we know. Abraham Lincoln was against the war. He challenged President Polk to show the American people exactly where blood had been spilled. Ulysses S. Grant called the war immoral, saying it was wrong for a nation like the United States to take on Mexico. Well, let's look at the two countries. They're neighbors, yet they didn't know each other. There were roots in Europe that were very controversial and would be fodder for conflict. I mean, you had Protestant England and Catholic Spain who had been fighting since the 1500s. So the Protestant United States comes into conflict with Catholic Mexico, and you have these old feuds coming to the surface. By 1846, the United States had about 20 million people. Mexico had about 7 million. The United States had new government ideas based on the writings of Hobbes and Locke and Jefferson and Adams. Mexico wanted that modern nation too, but she had an old, ancient Catholic and absolute monarchical system that were the foundations of her new government. This conflict would change and reshape both nations after, say, 1850. By 1848, with the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, Mexico agrees to sell the Southwest to the United States. The United States had initially offered $30 million. After the war, the United States paid $15 million. I always found that curious. Why would you pay for land that you are taking after a war that you won? I think there was a certain amount of guilt money involved, and also the realization that the United States would have to get along with her southern neighbor. Mexico would also have to rethink her nationhood, her national plan. How did this happen? How did she lose almost half her territory to a brand new nation that really was not considered a world power at the time? Britain had warned the United States not to go to war with Mexico. So this was a turning point for both countries. The treaty guaranteed the Mexican people in places like Texas, New Mexico, and California citizenship. They had the rights to the lands they had under first Spain and then Mexico. But as most treaties go, a lot of these agreements would be broken by the United States. So this is what happens in New Mexico starting in 1848. By 1850, we're a territory. We had enough people to be a state, but we'll see in the next episode why that wasn't to be, at least for 60 more years. We would remain a territory of the United States of America. Thank you for joining me. See you next time. Adios. Goodbye.